So can I start now like that?
Yes, please.
Okay. Hello, everybody. It's my pleasure to give a lecture here. I didn't expect so many people. So today I will talk about the gender inequality in the labor market, and tomorrow I will talk about the gender equality in the household. Actually, these topics are very much connected because they interrelate with each other. If there is no gender inequality in the household, there couldn't be any gender equality in the labor market. So the lecture plan is as follows. The first is why it's important to reduce gender equality. Secondly, I will focus on statistics regarding gender equality, giving a special focus on global gender gap index and the place of Switzerland. Then I will talk about the situation of COVID and the gender gap. Then we will look at why there is a gender equality in the labor market, what are the objective and subjective of reasons of gender gap and the gender inequality. Then we will look at the differences in the motivation and also the results of the some surveys, and then we will look how to make a gender gap smaller. That it's important not only inequality but equity of chance. So why is gender equality important? We can say that there is a tradition to more gender equality attitudes and to the high gender equality in the labor market and education and health and in other spheres. And there are lots of policy measures, especially in Europe, that have been taken to reach gender equality. For instance, one of the most important policies of the European Union is work-life balance. In Europe and now and also in other continents, women do not achieve lower results in education, and they quite often they actually achieve better results in education as compared to men, but they're less advantaged making their career. They less often occupy top positions, and they are often underrepresented in male occupations which are more prestigious. And still they do, instead of the rise of gender equality, they do most of the household duties. And this is female human capital and female abilities are not used enough in the labor market, and actually it both hinders economic development, it reduces the GDP per capita for country, and also it reduces the gender equality itself. Gender gap does refer to different spheres. There is a gender gap in education, in the participation in the labor market, and also there is gender pay gap, and there is gap in the share of women and men who occupy top positions in management and politics. And to see that, we can look both at separate indicators and indices. So now I will show you some of the indicators. So here we can see that there is a female and male labor force participation rate. So this is the share of female labor force participation rate compared to male labor force participation rate. And yes, I would also like to say, if you have any questions to me, you can interrupt me better maybe here, not than in chat, but you can interrupt me and ask questions. So we can see that here are not all the countries are presented. I just, because there are statistics for many of them, and this is the statistic of the pre-pandemic time. So we can see actually Switzerland here, where the situation is in terms of female and male labor force participation rate is rather good. So the female labor force participation rate is 85% of the male labor force participation rate. In some countries, in some African countries, actually, the female labor force participation rate is even higher. But in some, for instance, Asian countries like Iraq, like Yemen and Syrian Republic and Algeria, the low female labor force participation rate is very low compared to male labor force participation rate. So we can see, and this is the first step. This is the step for women just to enter the labor market. So here we do not see which jobs men have, which jobs women have, and the important is whether they work or whether they want to work. Also interesting indicator is the share of employment in senior and middle management. Here there is the statistics for large number of countries, and here we see the different situation. Actually, the participation of women also varies significantly by countries, but what we can see here, we can see that actually even in most in the countries where the situation is the best, the share of employment, actually the share of employment of women and senior and middle management is lower than the same share for men. And what's interesting that sometimes in like countries like Namibia and Honduras are performing better than some European countries in this respect. So this is just some of the some demonstrations or some demonstration of statistics. And for instance, we can see Switzerland here, like the share of women is only around 1/3. There is a way to look more systematically about the situation of women and men in the labor market, about the global gender gap, and about the women's participation. And actually, we can look not only at the labor market, but at the other activities. And how we can do that? We can look at the different indexes that is the composite indicators of different characteristics. There are quite a number of indexes. I will list them later, but in this presentation, as we have limited time, I would like to focus on the global gender gap index that consists of 4 sub-indices, and they show whether gender gap is closed or not in these 4 sub-indices. So they are the following. First is economic participation and opportunity. This refers to the labor market. Second is educational attainment. This is an access to education. Then there is health and survival, and then there is a political empowerment. We will look at it in more details, but you can see here that here we can see whether the gender gap is closed or not. But we can see here that for the 2000, this is the date actually, the report for 2021, the date is for 2020. The gender gap in educational attainment and health and survival is mostly closed, and this is the situation for mostly all the continents. The situation in economic participation and opportunity, and actually that first the labor market is closed only about 58%. So women perform around less well than men. And the gap in political empowerment is closed only on 22%. So we can see here differences, huge difference. What components are there? So first, this is economic participation of opportunity that refers to the labor markets. First, there is a labor force participation rate. Here we also can see the female labor force participation rate and female labor force participation rate. These are people who are work or who are unemployed, or those who are ready to work. So those who are in this labor market. Second, there is a wage equality for similar work. So this means when the men and women and the same amount of money for the same type of work done. Second, there is estimated earned income. This is an average income for men and women. Here the type of work is not taken into account. And finally, there is a percentage of women among legislators, senior officers and management, and professional and technical work. So, and what is important here, and I personally think that this is the drawback of this index, I will demonstrate it later, that when men perform, when women perform better in some regard, it is not taken into account. So the index is equals to 1. For instance, in Russia, there is a high share of women among these professional and technical workers, but it's not taken into account. So here we can see this educational attainment, literacy rate and enrollment in 3 levels of education. We have health and survival, so there is sexual ratio at birth and health life expectancy. Yes, and as you know, the health life expectancy is usually it is higher for women than for men, and it's in some countries the gap is larger than the others. So I think this component is should somehow be recalculated because it doesn't take into account the women's advantage over men actually that exists in most of the countries. And finally, we have political empowerment. This is the share of women in parliament in ministerial positions, and yes, with female head of state in the last 50 years. So we can see some, now I'm showing you the differences by regions. So we can see that there are differences that Western Europe and North America, they form the best, and the situation is the worst in Middle East and North Africa and in South Asian countries. And what is more interesting, we can see there whether for these regions whether the gap is closed. So let's start with this two aspects. For educational attainment and for health and survival aspects, actually, why I would look firstly at them, because here there is the gender gap is mostly closed. So with the health and survival, no region of the world is an outlier. For educational attainment, only sub-Saharan Africa performs a bit worse than the other regions. However, we can see more discrepancy in economic participation and opportunity, and especially in political empowerment. So for the economic participation and opportunity, the 3 regions perform the best. That's North America, that's Eastern Europe and Central Asia and Western Europe. And the most problematic regions are the South Asia and Middle East and North Africa. As far as political empowerment is concerned, here we see that even in Western Europe, where the situation with political empowerment is the best, there is only the gap is closed only around 40%, and in some areas like Middle East and North Africa, East Asia and Pacific, and Eastern Europe and Central Asia, this gap is hardly closed. And here you can see this highest level of gender equality, so the smallest gender gap. It's and the lowest level of gender equality, so the largest gender gap. The highest level of gender equality is in Iceland, Finland, Norway, New Zealand, Sweden, Namibia, Rwanda, Lithuania, Ireland, and Switzerland. Actually, Switzerland this year is performing better than the last year. And the lowest level of gender equality is in Afghanistan, Yemen, Iraq, Pakistan, and Syria. So in this slide, maybe it's not big enough, but I will send you the slides. You can see the dynamics. So here is the political empowerment. There was the positive dynamics, but it's dropped a bit again in 2021. Here you can see the dark blue is health, and the light blue is educational attainment. We can see some we can see some progress in educational attainment, but actually this index is changing, but it's not changing that dramatically. There is an improvement from 2006 in economic participation and opportunity, and still there is also improvement in the global gender gap index. And so here you can see also the performance by different regions. You can the differences do not, they do exist, and they are rather strong. Maybe it's not quite well seen in this graph, because still it's it's in some way here, but in general there is a progress. There is a progress toward gender equality. We can see some regress, dramatic regress for 2028 for South Asia, and we see some improvement in performance of North America compared to Europe. Okay, now I would like to show you how it's calculated as the example of Switzerland. So you can see here just the main scores for Switzerland. So Switzerland is performing rather well in it has rather lower ranks in educational and attainment and health and survival, but this is just due to the fact that most of the countries perform high, and actually the difference is not huge. It's above average in both ways. It performs rather well in economic participation and opportunity. Its the score is much higher than average, and it performs very well in political empowerment. And so here you can see they have some graphs. You can see how well performs. You can see the average scores and how well performs this specific country. Also, we can see improvement from 2006 in its performance. Both the index has grown, and also the rank of Switzerland is higher. But it was even last year it was the rank 18 instead of 10. But here I would show you in more detail how this index is calculated. So what we can see here, that the most interesting part for us is labor force participation and opportunity. We can see here that in terms of labor force participation rate, for female it's slightly lower than for men, but it's still rather high. Also, we can see that the share of women among professional and technical workers is also almost the average. It's also rather high, but first we can see that the share of women among legislators, senior officers, and management is around 1/3. It's lower, and also we see the problem here is in this mostly not in the positions that women occupy in the labor market, but the problem is in the wage. First, you can see that the estimated earned income is more than 20% lower for women and for men, and for the equal job, women earn less money than men. I wouldn't focus more on the educational attainment, because here the chances are almost the same. Actually, we can even see here that, for instance, enrollment in tertiary education is higher for women, but when the rate is 1.03, but we can see here, so when it's converted into index, it's equal to 1. So when women have an advantage, it's not taken into account in this index. The healthy life expectancy is higher for women, but it's not dramatically like in some countries, for instance, like in Russia. And also, what is good for Switzerland, the participation of women in politics is rather high. So we can see that there is quite a decent number of women in parliament and in ministerial positions. Yes. But of course, there is a lot, and for some time, also there is time when women was a president. So I wouldn't dwell on this slide. Maybe if you are interested, you can look at other indices. And don't have time for this. So what indices do not capture? First, as I have shown, they do not capture the disadvantages for men. Second, they do not spend time spent in the household. It's much more, we'll talk about more tomorrow, it's much more difficult to measure, both to measure and to influence the share of household labor, because it's impossible to control what is happening there. So you can have some legislations, you can have some laws regarding the participation of women in the labor market and policies regarding their salaries. You can have ways to somehow to combat discriminations, but you cannot control what is happening in the household. You can have some measures, but still it's not a full control. Also, it doesn't take into account what work is done, whether it's difficult or easy, but whether it's more qualified or less qualified, because even the position could be in the labor market, it could be the same, but the responsibility and the prestige of it could be different. So index is a good way to look at the complex picture, but there are some nuances that it doesn't take into account. Okay, what happened in the case of the COVID? Of course, we will have to look at the consequences after some time, because now not all the consequences are evident. But when we can see that women still have suffered more from COVID pandemic. The high share of female employment was destroyed than male employment. The drop in female employment was around 4% and 2%, and the drop in male employment was 3%. Why was it so? Because women are often overrepresented in the most hit sectors like care work, like manufacturing, like service sectors, that just more people in these sectors lost their jobs. So also there is a high share of women of informal employment that suffered more from the COVID. And also there are subjective things and related to the unpaid care work that is done mostly by women, and also the risk of violence and harassment, and women have a limited access to social protection. So as they are more involved in their household, they have more responsibilities there. They have more responsibilities and for caring for all the relatives and for children. And that's why they also suffered more from this situation. Also, the decline was different across regions. It was the highest decline was in America. There was the highest drop in employment, and also it's very highly dropped in Arab states. And less was evident for Africa, but I think that in Africa the COVID measures were less strict. But still, we'll look at the consequences that certainly should be. They will be more seen in future, and these consequences would relate both to the labor market and to the distribution of household labor, and also to the attitudes to gender equality. These consequences could be, but they would be, but they are not all of them not as seen now. So now I will turn to the causes of gender gap. Why is it so? We looked at the situation, but why is it so? There are both different causes why women perform less successful in the labor market and in politics. There are some that the causes are objective. First, women less often occupy top positions, and even if when they do occupy top positions, quite often these positions are more precarious ones, and that first they will be more affected by the crisis. Even they in management, they are more often human resources and financial management, and they less often occupy positions in strategic planning. And there is a low share of women in top management. So still, it's this is both. We'll talk about it later. It's both a cause of discrimination and self-discrimination. So it's not only because women do not have an opportunity, but also sometimes they do not want to have the highest positions because they have to. For them, it's more difficult to combine work and family responsibility. Second, there is a segregation, both in education and in sector. So there are less women in STEM, and STEM areas now the shares are increasing, but still, even if a woman gets the STEM areas, it's more difficult for her to gain a job. And and there are more women in humanities and for in other areas where it's more easy to get a good job. Also, there is a segregation by sector. There are more women in educational service, and there are more women in service sector. And these sectors have actually low salaries, and that's why we have a gender pay gap. Also, some of the problem refers to working hours. There are more women who work part-time, and part-time, when, for instance, a person is working 20 hours instead of 40 hours, not only then he usually gets less money, like less money than half for this 40 hours, because they're not quite often they're not ready to work overtime, and there are less for the part-time positions. There is less social security, there is less benefits, there is less extra money, and so on. So they lose because they work less hours, they actually lose more than half of the salary, for example. And of course, women have career breaks for child rearing and for caring for older relatives. Although there are some policies, especially in Nordic countries, how to make the opportunities for men and women equal. For instance, when fathers have to take the parental as well as mothers, but still it's difficult to implement. And second, it's not present in all the countries. Still, women are more engaged in this. But of course, the situation is dramatically different by country. But still, it's women who are giving birth to the children. And in the developing countries, now there are less and less countries like this. Still, women have a lower access to education and access to the labor market itself. So, for some countries, for instance, in some of the Asian countries, it's even difficult for women to enter the labor market. It's not the case of European countries nowadays. But for some countries, it's even like that women cannot enter the labor market. They even cannot start. Okay, there are also, in this regard, there are different types of gender discrimination in the labor market. There are two main types of gender discrimination. They can, in some cases, both of them are present, but in some countries, one of them are more present than the other. These are glass ceiling effect and sticky floor effect. Glass ceiling effect is it's more widespread in the developed countries, because in development countries you do not even get to this. But women are less likely to receive higher than certain amount of salary. Women are less likely get higher than a certain type of position. So they can be quite successful in the first stage. They can become good in education. They can have good positions in the labor market, but for them it will be difficult to get a very high salary, to get to be the head of the enterprise, to be the head of the big firm or big enterprise, to get the highest salary, to have the best management positions. So they can do rather well, but only lower than some level. So this is called the glass ceiling effect. So there is a glass ceiling that women cannot fight. And in the developing countries, they have a flow effect that it's difficult for women to be promoted from the lowest positions. They're promoted slower than men. So that's even so. For instance, when women stay secretaries, so when they have these low-skilled jobs, they cannot get these decent jobs, and so they just cannot get from this sticky flow. As there are lots of policies how to fight this gender discrimination, these effects become more subtle. For instance, there is a glass cliff effect, that like type of the glass ceiling effect, when women can get the management positions, but usually these positions are more precarious. They are more likely to be hit by the crisis, and they're less prestigious than men, and so on. They get rather good jobs, but worse than men. And also there is a Queen Bee effect. Successful women distance themselves from the other women. Well, now I think it's getting less and less popular, especially in some countries, because they changed of gender role attitudes towards more egalitarian, but still there's sometimes that when a woman is too successful, sometimes it's not somehow improved. And what is also important, that gender discrimination could be strengthened by other types of discriminations, like discrimination against migrants, ethnic minorities, disabled. So if there is a woman and a migrant, it could even more difficult for her to get a position. Also, besides these differences in discrimination, there are differences in motivation. There is somehow gender paradox. When women report higher job satisfaction than men, even they face the same material and status advantage. Quite often they are satisfied with the same with the low level of salary. They often satisfy themselves with a low level of salary and the low quality of jobs. The women can be satisfied with this certain salary, and the men would be not happy with that. Why it is happening? Well, first of all, it happens because women know about the discrimination and they need a job, and they are ready to get a job of a bit low quality and a low salary. And second, the women value themselves less than men. The women report quite often more intrinsic motivation, that is less, and men report extrinsic motivation. And then extrinsic motivation usually refers to the salary and to the position, and the intrinsic motivation refers to the type of job done, about the job content, about the working hours, the flexibility, and so on. And intrinsic motivation is less dependent upon promotion and wage. But here it's more complex, and it will be more topic of the next lecture. But in general, men and women have different work values, and when women look for a job, they have to combine it with family responsibilities, and they often look at this flexibility, whether they can have flexible working hours, whether it's easier for them to get a leave, sick leave, for example, whether it's closer to their home, whether they can work part-time. So they look for different things a job. And this is also, it's not only because they cannot get the same job as men, but because they don't want to get this type of job. There are different theories explaining this difference between men and women, but one of the theories, I will mention just some of them, is the women are more fear, they have high fear against the success and achievement. They have low risk-taking behavior, and they have low self-esteem, and they are more afraid of home-career conflict. And the second thing is socialization, because from socialization that in the family and at school and during the education, men and boys and girls have expectations from parents, and women see less support when they want to be successful in their career, and so it's more important for them to combine work and family responsibilities. Okay, here also in social sciences, there is a concept of gender role attitudes, that actually is the attitudes towards gender equality, where the men, it's just a personal point of view, whether men and women should be equal and have equal other opportunities, or whether they have different social roles. And gender role attitudes have there are two types of gender role attitudes. One are the attitudes towards men and women in the public sphere, in politics, labor market, and education. And the second gender role attitudes in private or domestic sphere. It's the distribution of gender roles in the family. Who should cook, who should take care of kids, and so on. And there is a continuum from traditional and to egalitarian gender role attitudes. Traditional gender role attitudes see the specialized roles that women as a caregiver and men should earn money and be a primary or the only breadwinner of the household. And the egalitarian gender role attitudes support the women's role in the public sphere as well as the men's role in the private sphere. So actually, most of the people are somewhere between this traditional and egalitarian gender role attitudes. They, for instance, they can be more traditional in one domain and more egalitarian in another domain. So here the situation is complex. And now I will focus on this, the topic of the lecture. I will focus on the gender role attitudes in the public sphere. They're measured in different surveys, also the surveys made by countries, but there are some huge data sets like World Value Survey and European Value Study, European Social Survey that we work with this, and we implemented somehow. We implemented this research in Russia, so I will talk about them. There are some examples of questions of the gender role attitudes in public sphere. So a person could either agree or disagree with it, that on the whole, men make better political leaders than women do. A university education is more important for a boy than for a girl. And on the whole, men make better executives than women do. So these three questions form the index of gender role attitudes in public sphere. And if a person disagrees with them, that means that he has an egalitarian gender role attitude. And these questions measure the progress of gender equality. Also, there is another question that also refers to the gender role attitudes in the public sphere and also measures discrimination, that when jobs are scarce, men should have more right to job than women do. And here we can see the statistics by different countries. So there is a share of people who disagree that when jobs are scarce, that men should have more right to a job than women. So we can see here that so those who disagree have egalitarian gender role attitudes. So here we can see that Nordic countries are on the top. Switzerland is lower. So for instance, in Nordic countries, like almost 100% disagree that there should be gender discrimination. But in some, like in Iraq, Jordan, Pakistan, and Egypt, for instance, the share of those who disagree with is very low. So in many countries, still people think that there should be gender discrimination. And even in the middle here, we can see, for instance, you can see here Romania, we have see here Georgia. So many countries actually. Well, for instance, in Hungary, which is Eastern Europe, there are lots of people who disagree, who actually agree with the statement. 40% respondents agreed with the statement. So, as you can see here from this graph, that in many countries, ordinary people still support in a way in gender discrimination. Here we can see in the next slide the gender role attitudes in public sphere. This is the answers to these three questions are named here, that men make better political leaders, executives, and that university education is more important for a boy than for a girl. Yes. So here we can see here less differences, but still because the scale is different, but still countries vary dramatically. And here the situation also is the close one, because this actually we are speaking about the same thing, that in some countries almost So everyone disagree with this. Almost everyone has egalitarian gender attitudes, but in some countries, traditional gender attitudes are more widespread. And here I just took Europe, that you can see that even in Europe, the differences in countries, you can see better, they're dramatic. And in general, in the Eastern Europe, the general attitudes are less egalitarian than in Western Europe. That refers to the general attitudes in public sphere. Also, I just briefly mention the predictors of general attitudes, like from different surveys, that actually usually there is women have more egalitarian general attitudes. Those who are higher educated, who have higher income, who have higher occupational status, who have younger age, of later age cohort, and those who are less religious. In general, these people have more egalitarian gender attitudes. The effect of these predictors could be different by country, but still it's not like, for instance, in Nordic countries, some of the predictors are less significant because almost everyone has egalitarian general attitudes, but still this is a tendency that were shown in different studies. Well, how I don't have much time, but what's important to say here, that even sharing this, having this egalitarian general attitudes is only one step for gender equality, because this means specific acceptance of gender equality, and it is obligatory, but it's not sufficient for changing the situation in the society and in the labor market, because those who prove gender equality strategies do not always introduce them in practice. So one thing is the achievement motivation, what this woman wants to achieve, because sometimes the situation is like that the women can fully support egalitarian gender attitudes and fully support that men and women should have the same general attitudes, but at the same time, but at the same time, when it refers to her, for her it would be more important to combine work and family roles. General attitudes change rather slowly, but it is possible to have an impact of them with the help of social policies, with the help of situation in the society. And also, I think that COVID pandemic can have an impact upon general attitudes in the long run and possibly in different directions. And so the last part of my presentation, what to do and how to achieve gender equality. My general point is not possible to achieve full gender equality. First, it's not possible because these are women who give birth to children, that women and men have different motivation. But what should be done, that men and women should have equal opportunities in the labor market. The women shouldn't be discriminated in the labor market, and that refers to the different levels. So some of these measures I mentioned are more relevant to developing countries, some are more relevant for developed countries. So in countries where there is a sticky flow effect, where there's discriminations on the labor, on the lower stages, there should be minimum wage, that women shouldn't be paid less than a certain amount of money. Second, it's important to improve the access of women to decent jobs. These are jobs with a decent salary, with some social guarantees, with the social security. So, for instance, not only that she cleans something and gets some very low wage and that's it. She should have an opportunity to have a decent job. Also, the strategy could be ensuring the equal pay across industries and across the sectors of economy. For instance, in the sectors of economy like education, where women are more represented, there could be more money could be paid. Also, for the companies, transparency pay policies could be introduced, so where there is explained why this person gets this amount of money and for which. how it can be explained, and so on. And the wage should be based on the current position and not on the previous pay, because, for instance, if women have been discriminated in her previous place of work, she is likely to be discriminated and get a lower salary in this place of work, in this next place of work, because she had low salary than men there. And if the salaries if you state the salaries according to the responsibilities and not the salaries in the previous job, it could also help to combat the discrimination. And also there is, in general, improving the evidence base for gender gaps in the labor market. We should know what is happening, why it is happening, and so on. Next steps will be also possible that ensuring the non-standard forms of employment do not weaken employment rights. So even if a woman part-time is employed part-time, she should have she should have a written contract, she should have social guarantees, she should have an opportunities to take holidays, and so on. Also, respecting gender segregation by occupation, so giving more women the opportunities to get education and jobs in the sectors with the higher salaries. Well, what is also important in this is partially important today, is the increasing flexibility of hours and place of work. And during the era of COVID, it's easier to achieve, but it's when there are such opportunities, it could be easier for women to combine work and family responsibilities. Actually, they still face more difficulties because they still face more difficulties at home, because quite often they are more responsible for housework and they're doing more. But still, it could be the way out. Also, there could be flexibility regarding sick leaves, regarding holidays. So if a person is less penalized for that, it could improve the opportunities for women. And also there could be improving infrastructure for childcare and care for elder relatives. Well, in general, also there's, which is even more important in the age of COVID, is encourage teleworking of women, because sometimes women are employed in the sectors where teleworking is not possible, but still there are ways of doing it. Also, it is important to establish mechanisms for re-entering in the labor market. For instance, after the childbirth, it's important to support women so they can get a job, because they have they had a break in the career. They should have opportunities to enter the labor market. So, and also there could be subsidies for female entrepreneurs. In area of COVID, there should be support of women's livelihood in case of emergency. That is not equally important for the countries, but still, and so there should be some measures to prevent domestic violence, like domestic violence hotline services also exist to a different extent across the world. In general, one of the most important goals is to promote egalitarian gender attitudes, and not only in the public sphere, but also in the domestic sphere, like the equal division of labor. For instance, because sometimes there is a point of view that women can be as successful as men in the labor market, but still they should do most of the housework. Then they should be the first, the primary caregivers, and it's difficult to combine these two things. And although the full gender equality here is not possible, but still promoting it to a large extent would benefit not only for women, but also for men. It's a very difficult goal because it's impossible to control the situation in the household. But we'll talk more about it in the next lecture. So in conclusion, that narrowing gender gap is very important issue with social policy, but it is impossible to fully close the gender gap because men and women are different, and also in motivation and their life goals and so on. But we should create equal opportunities for men and women. So now that's all. I think the timing was okay. I hope so.
Thank you very much, Natalia. We have 129 people still connected. So before everybody is hungry, I leave the floor to people asking questions. If you agree to raise hand and then it's hard for me to scan the whole list of 130 people, but just raise hand and start speaking, basically. If you have any comments or questions for the speaker.
Yes, I have one, if it's possible.
Yes, please go ahead.
In one of the first graphic you showed us about the task force, the workforce, sorry. Some countries have a workforce of more of 100. Could you explain us a little more about the data? Because I do not understand why your workforce would be superior to 100.
Right. Okay, this is the so
maybe
this is the female labor force. Should I go to the slide?
If you want, then everybody else will remember what was
yes.
the meaning of the 100 there.
I will go to it.
You have to reshare though. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. So here we have female labor force participation rate to male labor force participation rate. And in some countries, the female labor force participation rate is even higher than male labor force participation rate. So in these countries, the share is above 100%. So this is not.
There are more women who work than men actually in that country.
Okay. It's not who work, but those who work or who are ready to seek jobs. It's those who are work or unemployed. But unemployed means that it's the people who don't have jobs, but who are actively looking for a job and who are ready to start working now. So it's not all the people who don't have jobs, because this is a very common mistake regarding unemployment.
Okay, thank you for the answer. And thank you for your presentation also.
If nobody else wants, I would have a question as well. In the attitude surveys, first of all, thanks for the talk. In the attitude surveys, how did the researchers distinguish between current economic situation and the attitude? So imagine that somebody in Egypt says men have a higher right to have a job. This might be because they either consider that women shouldn't have a job, or it might be that in their particular situation, the main breadwinner, and not giving that person a job might actually have a greater economic impact. Was there anything that would kind of separate economic and attitude at that stage?
Thank you very much. Actually, it's a very good and relevant question, because the questions were asked as attitudes in the service. They asked that there are the same questions across all the countries, translated to different languages, but the problem is that some people, when answering these questions, they actually can think about the economic situation, and we fully understand this items they're not perfect, and it's impossible. So some people can actually, when answering the questions, they can think about the economic situation. Some people, when answering the questions, can think of what they have in their lives. So unfortunately, when there was some interviews with respondents, with the respondents regarding the questions, when we tested the questionnaire, we could see this problem, but it's impossible to address it, because because people see the questionnaire and answer. There is no way better to do it. How to explain? But they were asked about the attitudes, but when they answer, they can think about the current situation in their country.
Okay, thank you.
So if I'm right, in the participants list, the raised hands come first. I don't see any at this moment.
Sorry, I did not raise my hand, Adriana.
Please.
Could I ask, do you see a correlation between religions and or religiosity? I mean, how much religious a country is, and attitudes to women?
Yes, actually, there is a very high correlation in more religious countries. The attitudes towards women are less egalitarian, that especially Muslim countries, the attitudes are less egalitarian. So in Muslim countries and in high religious countries, general women people support less gender equality, both men and women. There are some nuances, but yes, there is a strong correlation. And what's interesting, it's even stronger on the country level. So it's even more important what is the situation in the country than what is the situation with the individual. So it's more important, for instance, if in your country there is a high religiosity, or whether you individually religious or not, both are important, but this is even more. In Europe, it's the correlation it's more complicated now, but in general, the tendency was that clear.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions from the audience? People are starting to go for lunch. Jan, you have your hand up, but I guess you forgot it.
No, I would have a second question, if I may, actually.
Of course, you may.
On the to-do list, there were several proposals to actually improve the situation for women working in non-full-time jobs. And I understand that all of these would make these jobs more expensive for the employer. And as long as predominantly women choose these jobs, it might instead reduce the female participation rate if these jobs then get dropped because they become too expensive. Is this a valid concern? And are there perhaps ways to prevent having such a negative effect?
I think it's, yes, it's a valid concern. But yeah, I would say, how to explain? I mean, sometimes it's even if a woman can get a full-time job, she should have an opportunity. She should choose a full-time job. She should get this opportunity. But if she's willing to work only part-time, she should get a decent part-time job with at least some social benefits, with a decent salary. So it's easier to name the main directions than to implement them, because I fully understand. So when we talk about this, we'll talk about the reducing of gender gap, there also could be the problem of male discrimination. They shouldn't be discriminated. They should have equal rights than women. For instance, if man is more suited for some position than women because of his education and because of his career situation, he should get this job. Sure, not the woman because she's woman. Also, there is this problem. But in general, women should have the opportunities at least.
Thank you. Interesting concern that that Jan expressed, but also interesting answer. Thank you. Frank, please go ahead.
Yes, so there's one point which I was missing, and that concerns the child leave after birth. Okay. So typically this time presents a break in a woman's career, which then very often has an impact on career advancement, etc., etc. Now, in some countries, politics has started to share the child leave and also to enforce a certain sharing, which then means that the impact on the careers of women and men is also shared. Do you have any data on that, or?
I wanted to show this data on the next lecture, but yes, it's very important. I want to focus it on the next lecture, so that's why I didn't focus so much on this
Okay.
career breaks and parental leave. But yes, I will show you the data about the show the responsibilities about the parental leave policies in the next lecture, because this is closely connected to what happens in the household. And actually, this is the way how you can somehow how we can somehow encourage gender equality in the household with this parental leave policies. I think it's one of the most efficient way.
Okay, thanks. So we stay tuned for the next lecture. All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
And also, yes, it also differs by countries. It's important when a woman must take this parental leave, because sometimes, for instance, in Russia, men can take this parental leave, but they do not have to do it, and so they don't do it at all in general.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
So we could have a couple of more questions if people are. Otherwise, the topics are intermixed, and tomorrow we can have a longer session of discussion. Allow me to answer just one question. When you showed these good results for Namibia and Honduras coming first in the graph concerning senior to middle management post-occupation, does this take into account the possible fact that in Honduras and Namibia, the senior or middle management salaries can be totally different, and that a woman can occupy a top role job but still get less money? Or you know what I mean? Maybe it costs less in Namibia and Honduras to put women in top posts because they get the benefit of paying them less anyway.
I think it could be the case. Unfortunately, I'm not the expert in this countries, but what I can say that, of course, the situations, although they perform good in this indices because of the share of the men in the high positions, I'm sure that the situation is not that good there. That there are things that these indices do not capture. So maybe that's the cause that the women get less money. Maybe there is something else, but unfortunately, I do not know what is happening there because I'm not expert in these countries. But it could be the case.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is like Jan also said in both questions, there are intermixed reasons and criteria. It can be the salary background, it can be the culture and tradition background, etc., etc. And in the what to do, it was nice and useful, and for some aspects obvious, the list of what to do. And I was wondering, when people say that if women get into the labor market and contribute for equal contribution, get equally promoted, equally ensured, equally paid, then the entire edifice of family and stability of their children and all of that will collapse. These are things that, as you said on your slide and your answer to Adriana, are mostly originating from religious critics. But on the other hand, they do also have some wider audience or defenders that say that the cell of the future of society depends on women being available to raise children in a safe environment. So what can one respond to that?
Yes, it's a very important point that I think that women and men should have equal opportunities, but I don't think we should strive to the fact that men and women should be equal, because they're not. They're not equal physically, they're not equal, like there's a women who give childbirth, you can do everything with the parental leaves, but still it's difficult. But if we give them women equal opportunities, I think it's the way. And also what is important, it's important to be tolerant to different ways, to different ways of life, to different ways of career. So if even, for instance, if a woman doesn't want to give birth to a child and wants to focus on the career, it should be okay. If in some family, like woman is earning money and man is teaching the children, it should also be okay, because we also have this opposite problem that if a man takes a parental leave and sits with kids, it could be looked somehow, well, it wouldn't be looked okay. He wouldn't be considered a normal person sometimes.
Yeah.
So for my personal opinion, it's important to have equal opportunities in the labor market for men and women. But you have self-discrimination, we have different motivation. I don't think it should, we should strive to the fact that it should be equal. So, and it's due to religious things, it's due to cultural things. Of course, it's when a woman doesn't have any opportunities, when she sits at home and that's it, it's not okay, maybe. But in general, I think there is a nature. And
thank you. Anyway, I'm sure when you say men and women are de facto not equal, you mean they are not the same. So I guess this is an issue of English.
They're not the same. Yes,
they are not the same.
They're not the same. So.
And yeah, also when you say that women give birth after all, this is true, but we should not. But your point that all possible models should be accepted and tolerated, or maybe tolerated is not good English either, but I understand what you mean, yes. So I think it is best that we have time for tomorrow. Tomorrow we shall find a way to have all these contentful graphs truly full screen, because it was hard to follow the country names and figures today. But we could have on the frame the possibility to see that it was minus 18 degrees Celsius today. And during the talk, it became minus 16. This is impressive for us. So thank you very much again, Natalia. Thanks everybody for joining and staying in big numbers. Thanks to our diversity officer who joined as well, and look forward to tomorrow's lecture. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.